Once upon a time, there was a man who misused magic, found himself transformed into an ass by his lover. Only by eating roses could he hope to regain his human form. But even as an animal, he retained the mind and emotions of a man. And so, furious with his lover, spurned her offer to fetch him the flowers that would cure him. Yet, ignorant of his dilemma, the townsfolk took him to be a common ass, and would not suffer such a base animal to gorge on roses, and instead he did eat hay as other asses did. At last, by a goddess's hands, he devoured garland after garland of damask and crimson roses, regained his humanity, and forgot his human lover entirely. Until now, Fakir had Fakir had only been working to end Drosselmeyer's story, and had not penned one of his own. He never felt the need or desire to do so, and called himself a fool for it. For now, when his need was so great, he had not the slightest idea of where to begin. He was not used to turning to others for help. He stood between mythos and the world on his own for so long, he'd forgotten that he even could until Duck had forced her way in. Perhaps that's why it took him so long to remember Altua. Fakir's headache had abated somewhat, but his mood was still foul, and only worsened when he failed to locate the book of Sporing in his usual haunts in the library. At last, thinking of that meticulously recreated shrine to Drosselmeyer, Fakir headed for Altua's home. Although mended, the door still bore marks of having been battered by the desperate axe strokes. He knocked on that battered door open to Altua's startled face. Everyone else had forgotten. Would he have as well? As Fakir entered, he saw that the room itself was so carefully restored. No signs of past violence lingered at all, and though it was a full moon outside, the preternatural gloom of the windowless room persisted. The candles that had been lit for that purpose did little to alleviate the darkness that the closely huddled bookshelves guarded so jealously. Looking at the careful restoration of the replica of Drosselmeyer's study, Fakir knew Altor could not have possibly forgotten anything. And so, standing before Altor in his domain, Fakir began hesitantly to lay out just what had come. Altor's expression turned from startled to incredulous. "It's just a duck. How should I know what's wrong with it?" "Her," Fakir corrected slightly, not holding his anger in check very well and not wanting to. "Weren't you listening? She's Duck. She's Princess Tutu. The story stopped, but she's starting to disappear. She can't understand words anymore. She's forgotten how to dance." But Tor merely continued to stare at Fakir as if he were absolutely out of his mind. "Of course she's forgetting. She's a duck. How many ducks do you know that are smart enough to understand human speech? Don't call her stupid!" And Fakir was shouting suddenly, not certain when or why he had begun, his hands fisting in the other boy's shirt and all over a slur against Duck that crossed his own lips dozens of times before. Altua gave him a withering look, doing his best to ignore the threat in Fakir's eyes. "You're rather missing the point, which is that she's returning to exactly as she was before the story pulled her in." Fakir let go of Altua. "I already realized as much," Fakir responded, his tone resigned, fingers curling the palace vest at his side. "Then why exactly are you wasting my time for?" the other boy demanded, throwing his hands up in the air in utter exasperation. "I want to write a story." A piece of bread in hand, Fakir sat at the bunk of the pond as Duck pecked enthusiastically at the freshly baked loaf he had brought on his way here. She was far too human in his eyes for him to offer her stale bread or let her eat off the ground if he could help it. He leaned back against the tree, his eyes stretching shut. The feel of Duck pecking at the bread in his hand, her bill occasionally brushing against his palm, and the slightly cool breeze the only sensations keeping him awake. There had been such disappointment in Charon's eyes when he had faced a man after failing to come home that night. However, he could not bring himself to care. The sudden sensation of Duck's pecking threw him from such gloomy thoughts. He opened his eyes to find himself reflected in her blue ones as she gazed up at him in consternation. For there was no doubt in him that Duck thought she was. That was the expression on her face. The tasty bread entirely forgotten. His mouth tugged upward in spite of himself, into a faint approximation of a smile. For what could this expiration of concern from her mean, but that she had not lost all that made her Duck? She may have lost her memories and her humanity, but she was still Duck to the core. It was reassuring. Idiot. Just eat. Of course she did not respond with the irate quacking that would have resulted had he made such a statement soon after her transformation back into a duck. There was no doubt about this either. She had already lost her ability to understand human speech, the experiences and abilities of the girl duck fading away with each passing day, each passing moment. But he found himself unable to fall into the same despair he had given on that day. He had finally realized what was happening to Duck. It was all because of that dream. It had given him a rational hope. He mused that in that way, the dream had been much like Duck herself. Most of it nonsensical rubbish, but the only coherent words from the dream haunted him. And so he decided to give his humanity to her. He could not put into words his own thoughts, let alone on paper. The idea escaped him, like wisps of smoke, but some vague part of him knew that somehow, somewhere, there was a way out. Reassured by the slight lightening of his mood, Duck resumed eating, although much more slowly and pensively as she considered him. Her night. Once a cloudy memory, too cloudy to even be really called a memory, more of a feeling, really. The hails of night had drifted into her thoughts. She could not think of him in any other way. He had such a hollow look in his eyes lately. Has he always been this empty-eyed? So despairing? She wasn't certain. The answer to her questions seemed to keep slipping beyond her reach, lost in a fog of memory she could not penetrate. Somehow she felt he should be more fiery, prickly, sarcastic, or mean, or even bitter, but not so entirely devoid of all hope. Things appeared to be getting better, though. He did not look quite as anxious lately. Yet, in spite of the seeming improvement, she could not shake the foreboding feeling that seemed to have come to roost in her breast. Duck finished eating, and with one last backward glance at him, waddled towards the reeds at the edge of the pond and entered the water. For all that Duck, the girl, had the grace of a cow in a china shop, Duck, the bird, was inaccessibly agile. She glided over the surface of the pond with all the elegance of a ballerina performing a glissade. If he didn't know otherwise, he would never have imagined that her feet were working tirelessly to create the illusion of ease and grace as she moved on the water. He watched her swim about lazily, his thoughts adrift. As Fakir watched her sketch apparatus in the water, he wondered idly if he should shatter his own heart. Since it had worked for Mythos, she needed a human heart, Ator said. Wouldn't his do as well as Mythos had? What did it matter that the removal of hearts was a forbidden power? Foolish didn't even begin to describe the idea, but sometimes attempting the purely foolish was the only hope. It had been purely foolish for Princess Tutu to give back the prince's heart, knowing she would lose herself and his love. It had been purely foolish of Fakir to challenge not only the monster Raven, but Drosselmeyer with a pen rather than a sword. Yet it worked. The words from his dream, the idea of giving his humanity to her, persisted. He could have dismissed them from his mind even if he wanted to, his thoughts always circling back to the same place, that same foolish hope, purely foolish. Perhaps he could stand for the acceptable end of Duck's memories after all. Perhaps he could turn her back into a girl after all. His gaze still followed the little yellow duck idling about in the water. Just then, as if he could sense the direction of his thoughts, Duck's eyes met his once more. The feeling of foreboding spread its wide wings within her heart. That evening, the lonely light of Fakir's table lamp reflected in the window pane, emphasizing rather than banishing the darkness that seemed to surround him. He sat awake late into the night as he carefully considered the implications of what he was about to do. Through his own writing, he come to realize that words could be spun into fine stuff for tales without a price. He found this idea as he expressed with startling precision in a book he had first taken up in hope that it might teach him something of writing, thus something of spinning tales into reality. The world signed a pact with the devil. It had to. It is a covenant to which everything is bound. The terms are clear. If you want to live, you have to die. You cannot have mountains and creeks without space. And space is a beauty married to a blind man. The blind man is freedom or time. And he does not go anywhere without his great dog, Death. The world came into being with the signing of the contract. A poet says, "The force that through the green fuse dries the flower, drives green my age." This is what we know. Simply put, you can't get something for nothing. The price must always be paid. A balance absurd. And that was why spinning tales was such a dangerous thing to do. One of Fakir's old tireless attempts to defeat the monster Raven and resulted in the death of his parents. A simple, happy tale could never be spun into reality as smoothly and easily as all that. Sacrifices and pain and suffering were needed to offset any possible happy ending. So ravens had descended like a terrible plague of locusts, their beaks cutting like scissors into his flesh as his own screams and parents filled his ears. They had extracted forcibly the pound of flesh he had failed to pay in exchange for the glory of the happy ending in his childish scribbles. In the end, the price had been made, and so much lost and nothing gained. Of course, this particular aspect of spinning tales hadn't helped Drosselmeyer's senile old bull had been so infatuated with tragedy that he enjoyed tendering the price of even more than anything he could have hoped to gain by paying it. He had no problem making sacrifices from the lives of others to propel his stories forward. So what sacrifice, what price could return Duck entirely to herself? Absentmindedly, Fakir tapped the nib of his duck feather quill against the table, engrossed entirely in a train of thought. Thus, how could he word things? Granted that Drosselmeyer's power had facilitated the transformation, but what really made Duck human was Princess Tutu's pendant. And that pendant had been nothing more and nothing less than the princess' heart itself, the princess' own desire for humanity. Altora's words echoed in his mind. What was it then? The same answer that plagued his thoughts of vague unease ever since the night he had that dream. Would it be as simple as giving up his humanity, so she could have hers once more? But even as he put that deceptively simple idea to words for the first time, even if only in his own thoughts, all the old doubts returned. Who was he to toy with her life? And how was he to know if she was happier as a duck or not? He remembered her concerned blue gaze from the afternoon. In every way, in every story, Princess Tutu had lost all, happily giving away for the sake of everyone but herself. Wasn't it time somebody made a sacrifice for her? There was nothing to make him hesitate, no loose ends to make him pause. Altor would know where to find the manuscript, and he would cherish it, guard it as no one else would. For no other reason than it had belonged to Drosselmeyer once. Truly, there was nothing in this life as it was now he would regret giving up to her. And so, he pulled out a blank sheet of paper, meticulously dipped the nib of a fresh pot of ink, and raised the quill to pen a story. A story about a knight who sacrificed himself, split himself into two, separating his humanity from himself, and placing it into a stone the shape of his sorrow, the color of his heart, all for the sake of a princess that he alone in the world remembered. A princess he sworn to stay beside her for the rest of his life. He would grant her heart's desire. Whatever she wished to do with this humanity, it was hers to choose. And so, the knight, cloven in twain, gave his pendant heart to her, the princess the world had forgotten.